Imagine you have two geopolitical superpowers, right? And they are sitting down to negotiate a massive peace treaty.
Right. High stakes.
Incredibly high stakes. So the visiting monarch, who is this ruler of immense wealth, arrives at the rival capital. She's there to assess the threat. But before she even walks into the negotiation room, she looks into the lobby and get this, she sees her own heavily guarded throne.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the ultimate symbol of her sovereign power, which she had left locked in a secure vault hundreds of miles away. It's just casually sitting there.
That is, I mean, that's just a wild power move.
It really is. And, you know, for centuries, we have read this exact story and basically called it a magic trick, like a fairy tale, just some wizard waving a wand.
Right, exactly.
But today, for this deep dive, we are totally stripping away that mythology. We are going to look at the actual source code of this ancient text, and we're going to reveal what it really was, which is, well, it's a ruthless, hyper-rational masterclass in psychological warfare, logistics, and ultimately civilizational survival.
It completely upends how we are taught to read ancient history. I mean, totally. Because when Western audiences or, even traditional readers hear the story of Prophet Solomon and Bilqis,
The Queen of Sheba.
right, the Queen of Sheba, they immediately overlay this supernatural framework on it. It's all flying carpets, genies and lamps, teleportation.
Pure Arabian Nights stuff.
Exactly. But today, we are pulling from this intensely analytical breakdown. It's based on a September 1978 lecture by the thinker Ghulam Ahmad Parvez from his Tulu Islam series.
And he focuses on Surah An-Naml, right? Chapter 27, verses 38 through 44.
That's the one. And his whole premise, which is just fascinating, is that the Quran uses these historical narratives not as like mystical chronicles that you just memorize for blessings.
Right.
They're empirical case studies. They're precedents demonstrating what actually happens when a society running on a flawed, miscalibrated system suddenly encounters a correct, hyper-rational administrative framework.
So we are dissecting this today as master sociologists and systems engineers. We're going to see how an ancient text encoded this highly sophisticated manual on epistemological testing and the integration of governance systems.
Which is just a massive shift in perspective.
Totally. But to do that, we have to start before the famous throne incident. We need to look at the opening move.
The initial contact.
Yeah. The narrative kicks off with Solomon sending a letter to Bilqis. And he doesn't start with, typical diplomatic pleasantries. The text notes the letter begins with the phrase Bismillah, which traditionally we hear that and think, oh, it's a religious formula.
Right, like a chant or a blessing, you say, before eating.
Exactly. But Parvez argues something entirely different, doesn't he?
He does. He argues that in the context of statecraft of geopolitics, this phrase is actually a profound policy declaration. Solomon is explicitly stating the constitutional manifesto of his empire right at the top.
Okay, unpack that for us. What does that actually mean in practice?
Well, he is establishing an administration based on this concept of Rububiyat. And in Parvez's sociological framework, Rububiyat isn't just a religious term. It's a system of universal nourishment and development.
Meaning what? Economically?
It means an economic and social structure where the state actively guarantees the provision of basic needs. It ensures the development of the potential of every single individual, completely free of exploitation.
Let's ground that in the reality of the ancient world, because, most empires back then operated on a pure extraction model.
Oh, totally. The Assyrians, the Babylonians.
Right. They conquered you, they took your grain, they enslaved a portion of your population, and they basically just demanded annual tribute. The center enriched itself by bleeding the periphery dry.
Exactly. And Solomon is basically rejecting that entirely. The words used in that opening phrase, Rahman and Rahim, they denote this unearned, continuous flow of sustenance, kind of like how a mother's womb provides for an embryo.
So it's a completely different paradigm.
Exactly. So when Solomon puts this at the top of his diplomatic letter, he is notifying Bilqis of a brand new geopolitical reality. He isn't looking to conquer her territory just to add land to his maps.
Or to steal her gold.
Right. He sees a neighboring civilization that is highly productive, but systemically flawed. And he's basically inviting her to integrate into a system that guarantees non-exploitative development.
Okay, I have to push back here, though, because if I'm Bilqis, right, I'm the CEO of a highly profitable, functional state.
Sure.
I get a letter from a neighboring king claiming, hey, I have this flawless, non-exploitative welfare state, and I want you to join it. That just sounds like standard imperial propaganda.
Oh, 100%.
Like, why wouldn't she just see this as a thinly veiled threat of an invasion?
Because she absolutely does view it as a threat initially, which is exactly why she consults her advisors and attempts this classic diplomatic
It's a
deflection.
bribery attempt.
Right, she tries to send him immense wealth. These are gifts designed to test his motives. Because if he accepts the gold, well, he's just another greedy regional king.
And his whole manifesto is just marketing.
Exactly. Just PR. But Solomon rejects the gifts outright. He makes it crystal clear that his objective is not the accumulation of her physical capital. His objective is a systemic upgrade for her people.
So when the financial appeasement totally fails, Vilkas realizes, okay, I have to travel to his capital and negotiate face-to-face.
Which sets the stage for what is probably the most misunderstood sequence in the entire text.
The throne transport.
Yes, she is on her up. And Solomon turns to his court and asks, basically, who among you can bring her throne to me before they arrive in submission?
And this is where I get hung up. If the goal is just to show superiority, why steal a chair? I mean, why not just parade 10,000 heavily armed, highly disciplined soldiers in front of her when she gets there? Stealing a piece of furniture feels, I don't know, unnecessarily complicated if you're just trying to flex military muscle.
Well, because military brute force only demonstrates an ability to inflict violence.
Yeah.
Anyone can do that. Solomon is operating on a much, much higher strategic plane.
How so?
Think about what the throne represents. It is the ultimate symbol of her centralized power. It represents her administrative control and her most secure infrastructure. By extracting it quietly and quickly, he executes a logistical operation that demonstrates absolute administrative superiority.
Oh, I see.
He is showing her that his intelligence networks and his supply chains can penetrate her most secure, heavily guarded sanctum without even sparking a war.
Let's look at the actual mechanics of how this happens then, because this is where the fairy tale usually takes over. The text says, an Ifrit from the jinn offers to retrieve the throne.
Right.
If we aren't talking about a magical spirit or a ghost, who or what is an Ifrit?
We have to define these terms linguistically within the 10th century BCE geopolitical reality, completely stripped of all that later Persian and Arabian folklore.
Okay, so no magic lamps.
No magic lamps. The root of the word jinn simply means to be hidden or concealed. Sociologically, in that specific era, this referred to the rugged, nomadic, fierce, tribal populations who lived in the deep deserts or mountains.
So the people who were hidden from the civilized urban centers.
Exactly.
They are the outsiders, the people living completely off the grid outside the metropolitan tax structures.
Precisely. And an Ifrit is a specific classification within those rugged tribes. It describes someone who is physically massive, incredibly strong, and fiercely intelligent.
Almost like a super soldier.
Think of them as the ancient equivalent of elite, muscular military contractors, or mercenaries who operate on the fringes of the empire. Solomon has integrated these incredibly tough, resourceful tribal units into his regular forces.
So this elite mercenary contractor steps up and says, I will bring it to you before you rise from your place. Essentially, before this current court session adjourns, I can mobilize a strike team, rush across the desert to her capital, and physically haul that massive throne back here.
Right. It is an offer of raw, brute logistical force, and it's an impressive offer. It demonstrates that Solomon has these formidable physical assets and rapid deployment forces at his disposal.
But he doesn't go with the mercenary.
No, he doesn't. The text then pivots to introduce a completely different kind of capability. It introduces an individual described only as having knowledge of the book Ilm min al-Kitab.
And this is where external folklore always wants to name this person. They call him Asif bin Barkia, and they say he knew God's secret name, which supposedly functioned like a cheat code for the universe, allowing him to literally teleport the throne.
Right, and Parwes thoroughly dismantles that entire concept. The text deliberately leaves the individual unnamed because their specific identity is irrelevant. What matters is the qualification.
The knowledge of the book.
Exactly. Knowledge of the book in Parwes' analytical framework is the operational mastery of the rational code. Al-Kitab represents the systematic body of knowledge about how the productive universe actually operates.
So it's not a book of spells.
Not at all. It is the pinnacle of systems engineering, logistics, strategic forecasting, and natural law. The person possessing this knowledge understands how systems actually work at their most fundamental empirical level.
So we basically have a contrast here. The Ifrit represents supreme physical strength and raw speed. But the master of the book represents superior intellect, strategic planning, and administrative efficiency.
Exactly right.
And this systems engineer says, I will bring it to you before your glance returns to you. in the blink of an eye. And, I mean, this is the exact moment people point to and say, see? Teleportation, it has to be magic.
And taking that phrase literally is just a catastrophic misunderstanding of language.
Because it's an idiom.
Yes, the text utilizes Arabic idioms and metaphors. Before your glance returns to you, or in the blink of an eye, is a standard linguistic idiom denoting extraordinary speed and efficiency.
Right, like if a CEO today says, I need this crisis handled yesterday, they are not demanding actual time travel.
Exactly. They are demanding a specific, extreme level of operational urgency.
We use these idioms constantly. If I say, I'll be there in a heartbeat, I don't mean the literal physiological duration of a cardiac cycle, which is what, less than a second? I just mean I am moving with maximum possible efficiency.
Exactly. And when you strip away the superstition, you reveal a much more terrifying reality for Bilquis. Parwez argues that this advisor, utilizing advanced logistics, embedded intelligence networks, and strategic forecasting, had likely already set the extraction in motion long before the court session even began.
Oh, wow.
Right? Or they utilized communication and transport networks so highly optimized that they completely shattered the conventional expectations of speed in the ancient world.
Think about the psychological devastation of that. If it's just a magic trick, well, magic is arbitrary, right? Maybe Solomon just has a better wizard than she does.
Right, it's just a parlor trick.
But if this is a demonstration of superior logistical and operational infrastructure, it means her entire civilization is completely outclassed on a structural level.
Yes.
It's the equivalent of sitting down to negotiate a complex cyber treaty, and the opposing side casually slides a printout of your own nuclear launch codes across the table. They aren't even threatening to launch them. They're simply demonstrating that your entire concept of security is obsolete in the face of their technology.
That is a perfect analogy. That structural outclassing requires a complete paradigm shift to combat. You cannot fight superior infrastructure with just a bigger sword.
It's impossible.
And Parwez points out how tragic it is that we traded this profound lesson in statecraft for an Arabian Nights story. By turning Solomon's logistical mastery into a fairy tale, we entirely miss the manual for civilizational survival that's encoded right there in the text.
We want the glitter, not the code.
Exactly.
So the throne is secured. It's sitting there. Bilquis arrives. She walks into the court. And Solomon doesn't just point to the chair and gloat, which is what you'd expect. He initiates what we could call the linguistic deep dive, the test of the systemic versus the superstitious.
Right.
He gives an order to his court right before she enters, verse 27.41. He says, disguise for her throne. Let us see whether she will be guided or will be among those who are not guided.
And the phrasing here is just critical. Because in a traditional religious reading, guidance is always interpreted as accepting a specific theology or belief.
Like, convert.
Right. But in this geopolitical, systemic context, Solomon is initiating an epistemological stress test. Epistemology is the study of how we know what we know, how we actually process data and arrive at truth. Solomon is rigorously testing her cognitive framework.
He modifies the throne. Maybe he changes the upholstery, alters the context, shifts the lighting. He basically takes an object she knows intimately and places it in an impossible alien context.
He is asking a fundamental question about executive leadership here. Can this monarch, confronted with a familiar object that has been made deliberately unfamiliar, reason her way to an accurate identification? Or will she panic, jump to false conclusions, or let cognitive dissonance dictate her answer?
That is a lot of pressure.
It is. And when she's brought in, they ask her a highly precise question. They do not ask, is this your throne? They ask, is your throne like this?
Which is a total trap.
Completely.
If they ask, is this your throne? And she says yes, she looks foolish because she knows she left it back in Sheba, and it has been clearly altered. But if she says no, she is basically denying the obvious empirical data right in front of her own eyes.
Right. And her response is just a masterclass in reasoning under uncertainty. Verse 27.42, she examines the anomaly and replies with two words, kanahu huwa, as if it were it.
She refuses to claim absolute certainty.
Exactly. Claiming false certainty when the data is conflicting is the mark of an arrogant or foolish leader. She recognizes her underlying architecture, the core of the throne, but she also recognizes the specific variables that have been modified, as well as the impossible geographical context it's sitting in.
She calculates the probability perfectly by saying, as if it were it. She signals that she is actively reasoning under uncertainty. She doesn't deny the reality in front of her, but she refuses to commit to a binary answer when the data presents an anomaly.
And this is the exact epistemic response a superior system demands. Solomon's administration recognizes her as a highly capable, rational actor. She isn't driven by blind emotion or superstition. She can parse conflicting data and arrive at a nuanced conclusion.
It totally changes the entire dynamic of the encounter. Solomon isn't treating her like a conquered vassal to be humiliated anymore. He is vetting her as a peer.
Yes.
He is evaluating the processing power of the rival civilization's leader. And because she passes the cognitive test with the throne, he advances her to the final, most brutal examination, what we're calling the engine of reason.
This brings us to verse 27.4, the famous episode of the glass floor. And we have to address the historical scholarship here because the source material notes Parwiz's absolute disgust with how traditional commentators handled this specific verse.
Oh, it is genuinely baffling how far off the rails the historical tafsirs went with this one.
It really is.
The text simply states that she is asked to enter a palace. She sees what appears to be a pool of water, uncovers her calves to wade across, and Solomon corrects her, saying it is a palace paved with glass. That's it. That's the entirety of the textual event.
Yet traditional commentators spent centuries, literal centuries, writing pages of elaborate, non-Quranic fan fiction about this.
Fan fiction is the perfect word for it.
They claimed Solomon wanted to marry her, but had heard a rumor from the jinn that she had hairy legs. Or, and this is where it gets truly wild, that she had the hooves of a donkey.
Unbelievable.
Right. So according to them, he built this elaborate architectural trap solely to trick her into pulling up her skirt so you could verify the rumors. They even go so far as to detail how his advisors subsequently invented a special depilatory powder to remove the hair.
It just reduces a monumental geopolitical summit to like ancient tabloid gossip. You have two of the most powerful minds in the ancient world in negotiating the future of a civilization. And these scholars decided the primary issue at stake was ancient hair removal techniques.
Parwiz calls it an outright insult to the intellect. And he's right. It highlights a tragic flaw in scholarship. When the mind is steeped in superstition, it literally cannot process high-level systemic logic. So it just drags the text down to its own base level.
We have to discard all of that.
Completely. We have to look at the actual mechanics of the glass floor. It is not a prank. It is the ultimate epistemological trap.
Walk us through the trap. Because unlike the throne, where she spotted the anomaly and hedged her bets, here she falls for it completely.
She does. She relies on her standard data-gathering mechanism, her vision. She looks at the floor, and the visual data strongly suggests a pool of flowing water. Based on that data, she draws a completely logical conclusion. She needs to keep her garments dry. So she acts on that conclusion by lifting her skirt. She executes her decision-making process flawlessly based on the data available to her.
But the data is incomplete.
Exactly. Her data is incomplete because she is operating inside an architecture Solomon's system that is technologically, structurally, and systemically superior to anything she has ever encountered before.
She doesn't even have a concept of a clear glass floor over water.
Right. The underlying structural reality is completely alien to her previous experience, and that's when Solomon steps in and introduces the missing variable. It is a palace paved with glass.
I want to look closely at her reaction here because this is where executives usually fail.
Yeah.
If I am a CEO and I make a very public mistake based on faulty data, my first instinct is self-preservation.
Oh, of course.
I blame the intelligence agencies, I fire my advisors, I complain that the data was rigged or the lighting was tricky, I spin it.
But she does none of those things.
No.
Her immediate response is, "My lord, I have wronged myself." The Arabic phrase is dalamtu nafsi. Now, in traditional religious frameworks, this is almost always translated as a confession of theological sin, like I have sinned.
Right.
But in Parwiz's systemic reading, dalama literally means placing something out of its proper place, causing harm to its functioning.
So she isn't confessing a sin. She is submitting a root cause analysis of her own cognitive failure.
Precisely. She is stating, I acted on bad data, and operating on inaccurate information is self-inflicted harm to my own decision-making system. My internal algorithm is flawed.
Wow.
She acknowledges that her sensory data and her interpretive framework are fundamentally fallible when placed inside a superior system.
She basically files a crash report on her own brain.
That's exactly what she does.
It takes staggering intellectual courage to stand on that glass floor, look at the undeniable evidence of your own limitation, and admit that your legacy operating system needs a complete overhaul without getting defensive.
Which forces us to examine what her legacy operating system actually was. We know she was the Queen of Sheba, and earlier in the text, it establishes the foundational ideology of her people. They worship the sun.
Right, sun worship.
Parway asks us to analyze this not merely as, an ancient religious quirk. He asked us to look at it as a sociologist, mapping the thermodynamics of a civilization. What does sun worship actually do to a society's administrative structure?
Well, let's think about it. The sun is a physical, deterministic machine. It rises, it sets, it follows an immutable physical law. It has no volition, no moral agency, no dynamic intellect.
Therefore, if your society directs its ultimate systemic reverence, its highest accountability mechanism, toward a mechanical, deterministic phenomenon, your entire governance structure is miscalibrated.
You're capping your own potential.
Exactly. You are anchoring your civilization's development to a static, physical object, rather than the infinite, dynamic, rational principle that actually governs the universe.
Because if your highest authority is static, your legal and economic codes become static. You lack the structural capacity for rational adaptation.
This is what Parway calls the law of requital.
Right.
Mukafate amal. It is the law of cause and effect operating at the level of governance philosophy. The law of requital basically dictates that a civilization's trajectory is the natural consequence of the accuracy of its operating system.
So Bilqis ruled a wealthy, productive society. But it was structurally doomed to stagnation because its ideological foundation was miscalibrated.
It's like a company running on incredibly stable, but completely obsolete legacy software.
Yes.
It handles the local payroll, it keeps the local lights on, and if it stays isolated from the rest of the world, it seems totally fine.
But the moment it plugs into a global network.
Exactly. The moment it encounters a hyper-rational, vastly superior operating system like Solomon's, the legacy software crashes. It literally cannot process the data load of the glass floor.
And Bilqis realizes this in real time. When she experiences Solomon's information architecture, his rapid deployment logistics with the throne, and his epistemological stress testing, she doesn't retreat into superstition. She doesn't double down on the sun god.
No, she processes this overwhelming encounter as empirical evidence. She recognizes that a community that aligns its governance with the ultimate rational principle gains access to the full productive capacity of the universe. Solomon isn't utilizing magic. His society is simply aligned with reality.
This brings us to the culmination of the entire narrative, the synthesis of permanence and change. We are at the end of verse 27.44. She has survived the throne test. She has crashed on the glass floor. She has analyzed her own systemic failure, and she makes her final declaration.
The big moment.
She says, I submit with Solomon to God, the Lord of the worlds.
The preposition there is the linchpin of the entire political philosophy. She does not submit to Solomon.
She submits with Solomon.
Exactly.
It completely neutralizes the ego of the conqueror.
It alters the very definition of surrender. Think about it. This is the most detailed account of a diplomatic negotiation in the text, and it concludes without a single casualty. There is no military invasion of Sheba. No cities are burned to the ground. No populations are enslaved or forced to pay tribute. The rival monarch is not dragged in chains to kiss the ring of the victor.
Because Solomon isn't the final boss she has to bow down to. He is simply the lead engineer of a system she now recognizes as objectively superior, and she wants access to it.
Parway highlights the dichotomy here of the permanent principle versus the change. The change is the transient historical dressing. It's the ancient Near East context of thrones and courts and diplomatic letters and glass floors.
Right, the stuff that changes over time.
But the permanent principle encoded within this event is a complete, timeless theory of voluntary civilizational integration.
It's an entirely different model of statecraft. We are so used to empires that expand through kinetic violence. You destroy the weaker system and build your own on top of the rubble.
But the permanent architecture demonstrated here argues something profoundly different. It argues that when two governance systems encounter each other, the one with the vastly more powerful epistemic infrastructure has a higher choice. Instead of military imposition, it can demonstrate its structural superiority so undeniably that the rational leadership of the rival system voluntarily updates their own framework.
The transfer of civilizational authority happens through the demonstration of superior operating principles. Solomon demonstrates, Bilqis upgrades.
She isn't stripped of her authority. She gets a return to Sheba and continue ruling, but now she is running her civilization on Solomon's network. She has the rational code.
It is the ultimate manifestation of soft power. But it only works because it is backed by hard, undeniable, logistical, and epistemological reality.
And that is the true triumph of Bilqis. Her greatness wasn't avoiding a slip on a glass floor. Her greatness was possessing the profound intellectual flexibility to allow her ego to break so her civilization could survive. She completed a rigorous, evidence-based assessment and chose to abandon her legacy software.
It is a breathtaking reframing. We've taken what is universally sold as a bedtime story about genies and flying carpets and exposed it as a high-level manual on logistics, evidence-based reasoning, and epistemological stress testing.
It really changes everything.
We saw how true power isn't about magical spells, it's about the operational mastery of the rational code. We saw the disguise of the throne as a test of reasoning under uncertainty, and the glass floor as the ultimate sensory trap that forces a leader to admit systemic error.
We witnessed the most elegant political resolution imaginable. Integration through demonstration, not destruction. Two leaders submitting with each other to the rational principles that govern the universe.
Which leaves us with a necessary question to turn on ourselves. As you are listening to this, look at the institutions, the corporate cultures, the political ideologies, or even the deeply held personal beliefs you operate on today. Look at your own legacy software. Look at your own sun worship, your own miscalibrated accountability mechanisms.
If a vastly superior, rationally grounded operating system demonstrated tomorrow that your worldview is built on incomplete data, how would you respond?
Would you have the intellectual courage of Bilquis to stand on that glass floor, examine the evidence, and file a root cause analysis on your own brain? Would you be willing to say, I operated on bad data, I need to update? Or would you get defensive, blame the lighting, and stubbornly cling to your obsolete throne while the universe passes you by? Upgrading your worldview requires letting the fairy tale break so you can finally read the manual. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.